It was a chilly autumn evening, and Sarah found herself alone at home. Her parents had gone out for a dinner party, leaving her in charge of the house. Being a horror movie enthusiast, Sarah relished the opportunity to have the house to herself. Little did she know, this night would be unlike any other. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah settled in on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and queued up her favorite horror flick. The eerie atmosphere of the movie paired perfectly with the howling wind outside. She laughed at herself for getting spooked by the shadows dancing across the walls. Hours passed, and Sarah realized it was well past midnight. With a yawn, she decided to head to bed. As she turned off the TV and made her way upstairs, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the old house seemed amplified in the silence of the night. Just as she reached the top of the stairs, she heard a faint tapping noise coming from downstairs. Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She told herself it was just the house settling, but her imagination had other plans. Summoning her courage, she tiptoed back downstairs to investigate. The tapping grew louder with each step, echoing through the empty rooms. Sarah's palms were slick with sweat as she reached for the light switch, but before she could flick it on, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. Panic set in as Sarah fumbled for her phone, using its dim light to navigate the darkened rooms. That's when she heard it, a low, guttural growl emanating from the shadows. Frozen in terror, Sarah felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. With a scream, she bolted for the front door, throwing it open and racing into the night. Tears streamed down her face as she ran, the sound of footsteps echoing behind her. She didn't dare look back until she reached the safety of her neighbor's house. When the police arrived, they found nothing amiss except for the power outage caused by a fallen tree. But Sarah knew what she had heard and felt that night was real. And from that moment on, she vowed never to watch horror movies alone again. Story 2. As the clock struck midnight, Emily found herself alone in her family's secluded cabin deep in the woods. Her parents had left earlier that evening for an emergency trip into town, leaving her with strict instructions to lock all the doors and windows and not to open them for anyone until they returned. Emily curled up on the couch with a book, trying to distract herself from the eerie silence of the forest outside. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on the words, a sense of unease gnawed at her. Suddenly, she heard a faint scratching noise coming from the direction of the front door. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She told herself it was just her imagination, but the scratching grew louder and more persistent. With trembling hands, Emily crept toward the door, her body tensed for whatever might be on the other side. As she reached out to turn the lock, the scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press in on her from all sides. Just as Emily was about to breathe a sigh of relief, she heard a voice, soft at first, but growing steadily louder until it filled the cabin. It was the voice of a child, whispering her name over and over again in a haunting melody. Terrified, Emily backed away from the door, her mind racing with fear. She knew there was no way a child could have found their way out here in the middle of the night. Whatever was outside was something else entirely. Just then, the lights flickered and went out, leaving Emily in total darkness. She fumbled for her phone, the screen casting an eerie glow as she dialed 911. But before she could speak to the operator, a cold hand closed around her throat, cutting off her screams. The line went dead as Emily fought for her life, the darkness swallowing her whole. When her parents returned to the cabin the next morning, they found the front door wide open and no sign of Emily anywhere. To this day, the cabin remains empty, a silent monument to the horrors that lurk in the darkness of the woods. And every now and then, when the wind whispers through the trees, locals swear they can hear the ghostly voice of a child calling out for Emily to join them in the night. Story 3. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty streets, MIA found herself alone in her family's sprawling mansion. Her parents had left for a week-long business trip, leaving her with only the company of the mansion's echoing halls and creaking floorboards. Despite her initial excitement at the prospect of having the house to herself, MIA couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over her as darkness descended. She tried to distract herself with movies and music, but every sound seemed magnified in the empty house, sending shivers down her spine. As midnight approached, Mia decided to retire to her room. She made her way up the grand staircase, the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows casting eerie shadows on the walls. Just as she reached the top of the stairs, Mia heard a faint scratching noise coming from the end of the hallway. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The scratching grew louder and more insistent, sending a wave of dread coursing through her veins. Summoning her courage, Mia crept toward the source of the sound, her footsteps barely making a sound on the plush carpet. As she reached the end of the hallway, she saw the door to the attic slightly ajar, the scratching coming from within. With trembling hands, Mia pushed open the door and climbed the narrow staircase leading up to the attic. The air grew colder with each step, a thick fog swirling around her ankles as she ascended into darkness. When she reached the top, Mia found herself in a dusty attic filled with old furniture and forgotten belongings. But what caught her eye was a small wooden box sitting in the corner, the source of the scratching. Heart-pounding, Mia approached the box and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, she found a collection of old photographs, each one more unsettling than the last. They depicted scenes of a family long forgotten, their faces twisted in expressions of terror and despair. As Mia studied the photographs, she felt a presence looming behind her, a cold breath on the back of her neck. With a gasp, she turned to see a figure standing in the shadows, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Before Mia could react, the figure lunged forward, its icy fingers wrapping around her throat. She fought against it with all her strength, but it was no use. As darkness closed in around her, Mia realized she was not alone in the mansion after all. When her parents returned home the next week, they found Mia's lifeless body lying at the foot of the attic stairs, a look of terror frozen on her face. And though they searched the mansion from top to bottom, they found no sign of the mysterious figure that had claimed the daughter's life. Story 4. In the heart of a remote forest, nestled amidst ancient trees and hidden away from civilization, stood an old cabin. It was a place that whispered secrets of bygone eras, its weathered walls bearing witness to countless stories of joy and sorrow. One stormy night, as the rain lashed against the windows and the wind howled through the trees, Sarah found herself alone in the cabin. Her friends had left earlier that evening, their laughter fading into the distance as they retreated back to the safety of the city. As Sarah stoked the fire in the fireplace, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She told herself it was just her imagination, but every shadow seemed to dance with a life of its own, casting sinister shapes across the walls. With a shiver, Sarah wrapped herself in a blanket and settled onto the couch, trying to lose herself in a book. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, her thoughts kept drifting back to the eerie silence of the forest outside. Suddenly, she heard a faint tapping noise coming from the direction of the front door. Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She told herself it was just the storm playing tricks on her, but the tapping grew louder and more insistent with each passing moment. Summoning her courage, Sarah crept toward the door, her footsteps barely making a sound on the creaking floorboards. As she reached out to turn the lock, a voice called out from the other side, a voice she recognized all too well. It was the voice of her long-lost sister, who had disappeared into the forest years ago and was presumed dead. Sarah's blood ran cold as she listened to the voice pleading to be let in, promising that everything would be okay. But Sarah knew better than to trust the voice. She had seen the darkness that lurked within the forest, felt its icy grip pulling her sister away from her all those years ago. With a trembling hand, Sarah reached for the doorknob, her mind flooded with memories of her sister's disappearance. But just as she was about to open the door, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the fire, plunging the cabin into darkness. In the pitch-black silence, Sarah heard a whispered warning, a warning that echoed with the voices of the forest itself. With a sense of dread knotting in her stomach, she backed away from the door and retreated into the safety of the shadows. And as the storm raged on outside, Sarah huddled in the darkness, knowing that some secrets were never meant to be uncovered, and some doors were better left closed. Story 5. Deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, nestled between towering pines and mist-covered valleys, stood the abandoned Caldwell Manor. Once a grand estate, it had long since fallen into disrepair, its crumbling walls and overgrown gardens serving as a haunting reminder of its former glory. On a moonless night, when the stars were obscured by thick clouds and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth, Emily found herself standing before the decrepit mansion. Drawn by an inexplicable curiosity, she pushed open the rusted gate and ventured inside, her footsteps echoing through the silent halls. As Emily explored the mansion's dilapidated rooms, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, and strange whispers seemed to follow her every move. But despite the creeping sense of unease that settled over her, she pressed on, determined to unravel the mysteries of Caldwell Manor. In the grand ballroom, Emily stumbled upon an old portrait hanging on the wall. It depicted a young woman with hauntingly familiar features, her eyes filled with sorrow and longing. Emily felt a pang of recognition deep within her soul, as if she had known the woman in another life. As she reached out to touch the painting, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging the ballroom into darkness. Emily's heart raced as she stumbled blindly through the blackness, her hands searching for an exit. But when the candles flickered back to life, Emily found herself standing in a different room altogether, a room she had not seen before. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were lined with shelves upon shelves of old books and arcane artifacts. In the center of the room stood a large oak desk, upon which lay an ancient tome bound in cracked leather. Emily approached the desk with caution, her fingers trembling as she reached out to open the book. As she flipped through its pages, she felt a surge of power coursing through her veins. The words seemed to leap off the page, swirling around her in a whirlwind of magic and mystery. And in that moment, Emily knew that she had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed through the room, sending a chill down Emily's spine. She looked up to see a figure standing in the doorway, a figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes burning with an otherworldly light. With a gasp, Emily dropped the book and turned to flee, but it was too late. The figure lunged forward, its icy fingers closing around her throat. Emily struggled against its grasp, her mind reeling with fear and confusion. And as the darkness closed in around her, Emily knew that she had uncovered a secret that was better left buried, that some doors were never meant to be opened, and some mysteries were better left unsolved. Story 6. In the heart of the Louisiana bayou, where the murky waters whispered ancient secrets and the cypress trees loomed like silent sentinels, lay the abandoned voodoo mansion. Its weathered facade bore witness to centuries of rituals and dark ceremonies, its walls saturated with the echoes of the past. One fog-laden night, when the moon hung low in the sky and the air hummed with unseen energies, Claire found herself standing before the crumbling mansion. Drawn by a mysterious force she couldn't explain, she pushed open the rusted gates and stepped inside, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of moss that carpeted the ground. As Claire explored the mansion's shadowy corridors, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Strange symbols adorned the walls, and the air was heavy with the scent of incense and decay. But despite the creeping sense of unease that settled over her, she pressed on, driven by a curiosity she couldn't ignore. In the heart of the mansion, Claire stumbled upon a hidden chamber concealed behind a tapestry. The room was bathed in flickering candlelight, its walls adorned with talismans and artifacts of untold power. In the center of the room stood an ornate altar, upon which lay a gleaming silver dagger. As Claire approached the altar, a voice whispered in her mind, a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. It spoke of ancient magics and forgotten rituals, promising untold power to those who dared to wield it. With trembling hands, Claire reached out to touch the dagger, her fingers tracing the intricate runes etched into its blade. As she did, a surge of energy coursed through her veins, filling her with a sense of exhilaration and dread. But before she could grasp the dagger, a figure emerged from the shadows, a figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes burning with an otherworldly light. It spoke in a voice that sent shivers down Claire's spine, warning her of the dangers that lurked within the mansion's walls. Terrified, Claire tried to flee, but the figure moved with an unnatural speed, blocking her escape at every turn. Desperate, she reached for the dagger, hoping its magic would protect her from whatever lurked in the darkness. But as her fingers closed around the hilt, a blinding light filled the room, banishing the shadows and revealing the true form of the figure before her. It was a spirit, a vengeful entity trapped between worlds, bound to the mansion by ancient curses and forgotten sins. With a scream, Claire unleashed the power of the dagger, channeling its magic into a beam of pure light that pierced the spirit's darkness. And as the mansion trembled and shook around her, she knew that she had unleashed forces far beyond her control, that some secrets were never meant to be uncovered, and some powers were better left untouched. Story 7. In a quaint town nestled among rolling hills and winding rivers, there stood a peculiar old house known as the Holloway Mansion. It was a towering structure with ivy-covered walls and turrets that seemed to stretch toward the sky. For years, the mansion had stood abandoned, its halls empty and its secrets shrouded in mystery. One summer afternoon, young Tommy stumbled upon the mansion while exploring the outskirts of town. Intrigued by its eerie beauty, he pushed open the rusted gates and ventured inside, his heart pounding with excitement and trepidation. As Tommy wandered through the mansion's dusty halls, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows danced in the corners of his vision, and strange whispers seemed to echo through the empty rooms. But despite the creeping sense of unease that settled over him, he pressed on, drawn deeper into the heart of the mansion by an irresistible curiosity. In the grand foyer, Tommy stumbled upon a hidden staircase concealed behind a tapestry. Intrigued, he climbed the stairs, his footsteps echoing through the silence as he ascended to the upper floors. At the top of the staircase, Tommy found himself in a long hallway lined with closed doors. Each one seemed to beckon to him, promising untold adventures and hidden treasures. With a sense of excitement coursing through his veins, Tommy opened the first door and stepped inside. The room was bathed in a soft, golden light, its walls adorned with shelves of old toys and forgotten trinkets. In the center of the room stood a large wooden chest, its lid slightly ajar. Heart racing, Tommy approached the chest and lifted the lid, revealing a collection of dusty old books. As he flipped through the pages, he felt a strange energy pulsing beneath his fingertips, a power that seemed to resonate with his very soul. But before he could delve deeper into the mysteries of the books, a voice called out from the doorway, a voice that sent chills down Tommy's spine. He turned to see a figure standing in the shadows, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It was the spirit of a young boy, trapped within the mansion's walls for centuries. He spoke of loneliness and longing, of dreams left unfulfilled and promises broken. And as Tommy listened to his tale, he felt a pang of empathy stirring within his heart. Determined to help the spirit find peace, Tommy embarked on a quest to uncover the truth behind the mansion's dark past. Together, they unraveled centuries-old mysteries and confronted long-buried secrets, all while forging an unlikely bond that transcended time and space. And in the end, as the sun set behind the horizon and the last echoes of their adventure faded into the night, Tommy knew that he had found more than just a friend. He had found a kindred spirit, bound to him by the unbreakable bonds of friendship and courage.